I'm making this video mostly so I can link it whenever someone insists that it's stupid, wrong, or racist for tabletop RPGs, primarily Dungeons and Dragons, but also Pathfinder and all the similar ones. Well, you know how sometimes they have this evil race that's just an evil race? Yeah, this video is to link to whenever anyone is complaining about that. So let's define my terms here. When I say evil race in a tabletop RPG, I mean a race that's intelligent and very human-like in their behavior, if not also their appearance, and they're just stated to be evil, and thus the bad guys. Well, remember I'm talking about D&D here. I'm not talking about World of Darkness or anything. I'm talking about D&D and the RPGs that spawn. So, evil races are just evil, and thus the cartoonish, cat-eating bad guys of the universe, right? Yeah, no. Nope. You're wrong. Yeah, you're wrong. No, you pointing to the orc, drow, and null stat blocks right where it says chaotic evil doesn't make you right. You're still wrong. Think back to when you were in high school writing essays, usually for science class, and your teacher said that you need to define your terms. Well, that's because words can mean very different things to different people, even if those words seem universal at first glance. Let me tell you, if you think good and evil are understood the same way by everyone, well, you are in dire need of a philosophy class. The nature of good and evil is so discussed, argued, and written about by philosophers and people who aren't philosophers that there are entire libraries which hold nothing but the books about the nature of that specific conflict. We're talking rows upon rows of bookshelves from floor to ceiling, stretching out into the frickin' infinities on the subject, all right? It's complicated. It's literally one of the biggest questions humans have had since the beginning. So what does Dungeons and Dragons mean when it says good, evil, law, and chaos? Now, put your player's handbook down. It's not in there. Nope, it's not the Dungeon Master's Guide either. If you're wondering why they failed to define their terms, dooming us to forever argue about how orcs are black people, while ignoring how amazingly racist it is to look at actually violent savages in fiction and think they're African Americans, and thus, since all orcs are evil, the game's creators are clearly saying that all black people are evil. Just a brief aside, if you've never heard that controversy before, I assure you it's a thing. Anyways, D&D did define its terms. If you got on board D&D for 4th edition or 5th edition, you may think that I'm about to bring up the fact that Wizards of the Coast defined the terms lawful good, chaotic evil, and so on in their alignment rules for those editions. Nope. To hell with that simplified, cut down, and missing the point system. We're going back to 3rd edition. No, not 3.5, 3rd edition. Yeah, the one you probably never played and maybe didn't even hear about. You see, 3rd edition was when the creators of D&D finally got the alignment rules just how they liked them and how they thought worked really well. They were kind of in flux until that point, with not even all 9 options available. There was 4 sometimes, 5 sometimes. It was just a thing that they were throwing around, spitballing, trying to make work. You see, before 3rd edition, alignment was a choice of 1 item from a set of items. But for 3rd edition, and for 3.5, alignment was a spectrum between good and evil, between law and chaos. That part you're probably familiar with, so I'll stop dancing around the bush and get to the meat of the matter. Good, in Dungeons and Dragons, was defined more as selflessness than any cosmic or religious idea of good. Likewise, evil was defined as being more self-interested and self-motivated. A good aligned character would hear about bandits harassing farmers, and if they believed they could drive those bandits away, they would do so just because that's the right thing to do. Good aligned people in Dungeons and Dragons are the classic hero of fantasy fiction and folk tales. Evil, meanwhile, would absolutely do the same if they thought it would be beneficial to them. That's right, an evil aligned character would absolutely drive those bandits off if they could get something for it. Now, this doesn't have to be anything horrible and nefarious, like, yes, if you give me your firstborn sons to raise as ghouls, I will drive off those bandits. No, that doesn't have to be that. An evil aligned person could just ask for some money for their services, or maybe they will do it for free to the farmers, but that's because they're interested in taking the bandits' stuff, or maybe they're more interested in having a justified excuse that won't get them in any kind of social trouble to go hunt down and kill some people, because those people deserve it, and thus it's okay for them to be killed. All of those are things that a evil person is gaining from by going off and helping these farmers. So Evil isn't what you really think it is in Dungeons and Dragons. The point is very simple. In D&D, evil means the character is just motivated by that personal gain and not altruism. That's it. Once again, it doesn't mean they skin kittens alive to make condoms from their fur before going out to rape the orphans down the street every morning. It just means they care more about themselves than anyone else. Likewise, and conversely, good characters simply care more for others than themselves. Let's tackle law versus chaos next. This one's easy. Law means the character prefers that there is some sort of order and state of affairs, and that the world just works by a particular system. They value those systems, and as long as they apply equally to everyone in every situation. That may indeed be the laws of a nation. Or it could be the rules of a criminal guild. It could be the oath of a knightly order, or even just a simple gentleman's agreement between farmers within a small village where you just act a particular way because that's how it is. All of those things are examples of a code that a lawful character could adhere to and be a lawful character even if they were breaking the laws of the land. Now, chaos is the opposite of that. In this case, exactly the opposite of that. It's preferring to play things by ear. It's the belief that everything is different and thus everything should be treated differently. In the actual words of 3rd edition D&D's rules, law implies honor, trustworthiness, and obedience to authority and reliability. On the downside, lawfulness can include closed-mindedness, reactionary adherence to tradition, judgmentalness, and a lack of adaptability. Chaos implies freedom, adaptability, and flexibility. On the downside, chaos can include recklessness, resentment towards legitimate authority, arbitrary actions, and irresponsibility. Yeah, that's right. The upsides and downsides of each term were explained. What's the downside to good? Well, doing things for the sake of helping others tends to result in someone neglecting their own needs, which can very quickly lead to some serious emotional mental problems and even practical problems, depending on what those needs are. Evil's downside? Well, it's pretty easy to never do something that's right because it needs doing if you won't gain anything from it. So you can see that from that alone, good and evil, law and chaos, they're actually pretty nuanced terms that are being plotted on a spectrum here. They aren't black and white points on a line. Now, the spectrum is where neutral comes in. Some people think there should be order and structure to the world, but also some things should be judged based on the unique merits of the situation itself. Some people think that some people should be helped simply because they need the help, but also they should be allowed to personally profit on something. That is what being neutral is. A true neutral in the original sense of the phrase would be, well, the majority of real people on Earth in the modern world. Most people just don't lean too far in any direction. Most of us think that all pedos belong in prison, while also believing that a thief who steals a pen from a bank shouldn't be punished. Yeah, no, they're still a thief. Yeah, they stole the pen, but they still stole the pen. They broke the law. They removed the pen from its place of ownership, where it's supposed to be, without permission. That's theft. Now, see, a lawful character would insist that this thief be punished as befitting the rules of whatever culture they personally adhered to. A chaotic character would want to factor in whether or not the thief intended to steal the pen, intended the harm which resulted from the loss of the pen if they did indeed intend to steal this pen, and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, a neutral character probably wouldn't care, because it's just a pen. The most, the neutral character would insist the thief go return the pen, but wouldn't care if they didn't because it's a pen. It costs like 25 cents. Who cares? See, this is how alignment has always been intended to work. The alignments are not absolutes. They are yardsticks to get a handle on how someone generally acts and behaves. A simple shorthand for communicating how the person is. And it's very broad brush. That's the point. It's a tool. It's not a scalpel, it's a sledgehammer. So let's go back to our orcs. All orcs are chaotic evil. Okay, so that means that our orcs favor freedom, adaptability, flexibility, and are primarily motivated by self-interest. That's not a cartoon evil. That's the American Republican Party and the American Democratic Party. That's your neighbor down the street who insists the government is too big and too powerful and votes for people who say they'll try and diminish the state's control over the public, while also refusing to mow your lawn for you while you're out of town unless you pay him $20. Yeah, that guy. He's chaotic evil by the definitions of Dungeons and Dragons. What about the king who's building utopia that he truly intends to be a paradise for all? Well, because he's doing it so he'll be remembered as a good king by the pens of the historians, rather than just doing it for the sake of those he rules over, so he's lawful evil. Well, what about the lawyer who's defending a murderer in court because they believe the law as written, relating to how this murderer should be punished, isn't fair in this instance, and so the murderer deserves a lighter sentence? Well, they're chaotic good. You see, alignment was intended to be nuanced like this. Why? Because it's more interesting and fun and useful that way. Later editions of the rules gutted them just to save space, as other rules bloated in size and links because, well, Dungeons and Dragons is primarily sold in the form of books, physical objects that need to be manufactured and shipped. In fact, for most of the game's history, publishing them through the internet wasn't even possible. Now, that might not be true anymore, but certainly the idea of publishing your role-playing game rules expressly through a PDF file, or just having a freely available host online, that's all new and modern. Tradition carried this through until 2010, really. It was basically mostly physical books, objects that need to be manufactured and shipped. Thus, how much text these objects store determines how expensive it is to send a crate of them to a comic shop, and how many books can be in that crate. So that's also why there's an alignment system to begin with, ironically enough. Let's go back to the stat block that says Drow lawful evil, or rather, LE. That's there to let you know these creatures behave in an extremely space-efficient manner. Monsters get 1 page in the monster manual. 1 page that's mostly dominated by a picture. Sure, some very important monsters get 2 pages, but most get 1. Space is at a premium, and writing, generally speaking, Drow are motivated by self-interest and work within a code of conduct unique to their culture. That takes away some of your very limited space for their flavor text, or special rules, or other things that actually let you play the game. So you create a system that can convey that idea about how they are with 2 little letters that can just be fit pretty much anywhere in the stat block. Oh, and by the way, if you don't care about any of this and want to use your own personal notion of how alignments work, yeah, the old monster manual expressly stated the alignments of monsters, creatures, and NPCs and so on that's written down their stat block. That's the average version of how one is. That's not how they all are. That's just how, the average one is. Not all orcs are evil. There are good ones out there. It's just that their species tends towards evil, which in game terms means orcs tend towards being motivated through personal gain, be it social, financial, political, or whatever. Oh, how horribly terrible and horrifically racist! They're just like the vast majority of people in real life! Yep, well, you're probably neutral on the law versus chaos axis. On the good versus evil axis, almost all real-life humans are actually evil by the game's definition. So go ahead and plop any on the human stat block. Maybe then you'll understand how nuanced and in general alignment is meant to be, and I'll stop having to hear horror stories about a tabletop game about whatever fantasy story people can imagine is being racist because morons decided to cut down the rules for mainstream appeal and also shame on shipping costs by removing half of a page of text from a print product.